welcome along to episode 87 of Percussion Discussion. As usual, please check out our social media. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and of course, our world famous YouTube channel. If you wouldn't mind subscribing, it really, really helps us. And this way you won't miss any of the previous or upcoming episodes that we've got for you. And there's plenty of those, so we wouldn't want that. If you prefer to listen on the go, you can find all of our conversations in podcast form, and you can find those. They're free to download on Spotify, iTunes, and of course, all of your regular podcast providers. So if you wouldn't mind, please leave us a short review. This really helps. On to today's guest, a wonderful, wonderful drummer who has played with so many stellar artists, including Paul McCartney, Dire Straits, Julian Cope, the list goes on and on and on. A guy who's known for having a great feel and always a killer drum sound. It gives me great pleasure to welcome the fabulous Mr. Chris Whitten. So look, Chris, thanks so much for doing this. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Nice to talk to you.
Likewise. And I know you're a busy man. We've been sort of emailing back over the last few weeks, so that's good to hear. So yeah, as I say, it's really appreciated it. Now, let's go back, if you don't mind, to the very beginning before we do anything else. Where did music catch fire for you? What was the first memory of music?
Right. Well, I think my mother was really into music, and she was from the World War II generation, but she liked pop music in the 60s. And so she liked the Beatles and things like that. And I had an older brother, 7 years older than me. So he was, by the time I was like sort of, 7, 8, 9, he was bringing albums home, Jimi Hendrix, Pink Floyd, and things like that. So my earliest memories are when the Beatles films came out, Hard Day's Night and Help. I think my mother took me to see those. Right. And I remember I had the album at home, and I didn't have any idea about being a drummer or anything like that. But what I actually did was I had 2 knives and I was banging on tin pots to the records. I wasn't pretending to play guitar or pretending to sing. It was funny. I was banging on tin pots. And then to cut a long story short, I hated school. I never liked school. I hated the sports day. If you've ever seen that movie Kes with the schoolmaster, it was just like that. I went to school in Newcastle, football crazy, and the big schoolmaster used to welly the ball at you, and so I used to run along the touchline terrified. Anyway, one day the headmistress came into the class and said, "Oh, we've got a music teacher coming in, and he specializes in percussion. Is anybody interested in taking music lessons?" So I just immediately shot my hand up, anything to get out of some of these maths and physics. And so I started learning percussion. That was when I was about 11 years old.
Yeah, brilliant. So, I mean, it sounds remarkably similar to my upbringing as well. I was around the same age, and
right.
So when it said, I mean, a lot of teachers call percussion lessons, it could be anything. It could be drum kit. Was it percussion as well? Was it a bit of everything?
No, it was classical. I mean, this is before people started to think that pop or rock was anything worth teaching. So it was all classical. It was timpani, snare drum, stuff like that, triangle, xylophone, and I played in the school orchestra. And then we, as a family, we moved from Newcastle to Wales, and I continued on there. And I played in the National Youth Orchestra of Wales a couple of years, doing timpani and everything. And I still hated school. And so I was looking for a way out of school. And Leeds College of Music had just kind of started up, and they were the only college. I think Manchester College had what they call like light music course, which is based around sort of jazz, really. They didn't recognize rock or pop or anything like that, but some educationalists with foresight had decided, wouldn't it be good if we could teach kids jazz, like Duke Ellington and Miles Davis? And so Manchester were doing a course, and then Leeds started up and they were doing a course. And I persuaded my parents to let me apply to Leeds as a foundation student when I was 16, instead of going to sixth form. And I auditioned at Leeds, I got in, and that was it from then on. I was at Leeds for 4 years. I did 2 years foundation course, and then I did 2 of the 3 years of the main jazz course. And I was doing so many gigs by the 3rd year that they said, if you miss any more classes, we're going to kick you out. And the next day I got a phone call for a whole bunch of gigs. And so I just said to my parents, I either turn professional or I turn down all these gigs, upset a lot of people, and do my diploma, which wasn't worth anything at the time. A diploma in jazz wasn't worth anything. Sure. So I left college before the final year.
Interesting. I mean, it's an amazing story, and that's kind of how it should be. If you think, you've had all this training to go and do this, you get the offers, you go and do it. But prior to going to Leeds, I'm guessing you were gigging about with different. Were you playing jazz and what have you before then, or was?
No. I mean, it was all classical. Everything was classical.
Right, okay.
Nobody would take pop music seriously, but my parents bought me some bits and bobs of a drum kit, like an Ajax bass drum and a new era snare drum, with about 4 lugs on it and stuff like that. And so I used to come home from school every day. And as I say, my brother was 7 years older than me. So I had all these Jimi Hendrix albums and Cream and stuff like that. And so I used to come home from school at 3:30, and then I'd put on records and just play along to them for like 2 hours. We had neighbors. The neighbors were unbelievably kind to let me make a racket for 2 hours every evening. And so I hadn't had any really teaching in drum kit or anything when I went to audition at Leeds. And again, the foundation course at Leeds was classical based. Yeah. They had an orchestra at Leeds. And then they had from 18 years old, you could do the jazz course. Right. And so I spent 2 years doing the classical course at Leeds, but the whole time I was hanging out with the jazz kids older than me. And I just started gigging with them. So I didn't really start gigging until I was about 17 years old with some student bands just in local pubs and clubs and things. Sure. By the time I got on the jazz course when I was 18, I was playing in 2 or 3 different student bands. And I went to Spain one summer playing with a band, entertaining troops, and just loads of I was gigging more than anything else, really. I didn't really like the lessons, and I didn't go to all the lessons, but I was just playing every day. And the thing is, I was playing with people a lot better than me. So if I'd go to a band practice and we were playing a song that went, 6/8, 11/8, 15/4 every other bar, and I just couldn't play it, I just went home and practiced till I could play it. So that's how I improved, really, was just not wanting to be humiliated in the bands that I was playing in.
That's quite an amazing story. So, just out of interest, were you playing mallet percussion as well? Were you heavily into the mallet stuff?
No, well, I was supposed to, but I hated it and I couldn't do it. So I used to like timpani. Yeah. We used to take it in turn in the National Youth Orchestra of Wales as well. We all took it in turn. So I'd play a piece on timpani, and then the next piece I'd do triangle, and the piece after that I'd do snare drum. And it was the same at college. You'd do a concert every 3 months or something, and somebody would play timpani and I'd play snare drum, and you just mix it up like that. I used to enjoy tuned wise. I enjoyed the timpani, and some of the contemporary classical stuff we played. The tuning would change every few bars, so you had to know how to tune the timpani and everything. Yeah. But I was never any good at reading music and playing xylophone. I mean, I did all the exams and everything. I got grade 8 or something in percussion, and I did all the exams, but as soon as I didn't have to play vibraphone or xylophone, I just stopped. I really was only interested in playing drum kit, and all the other stuff was a means to an end to play drum kit, really.
But it's an incredible grounding to have that ability, isn't it, as well? And it gives you a different understanding as well, I think, playing some of the other percussion, maybe. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, learning to read music was amazing. And when I was at college, I read a lot of music because the lecturers, we would do like a concert playing Herbie Hancock stuff. It was at the time of fusion, Lenny White, Return to Forever. And so the lecturer would bring into the class a full score of all these fusion tracks, and you'd have to learn to play them from the music, sight reading and stuff like that. So I did a lot of that at college. And as soon as I left college, no one ever asked me to read any music ever again. It was all do stuff by ear. Yeah. But because I wanted to be like a freelance studio musician, I used to write the stuff out, but really simple. I would just like verse 1, 8 bars, chorus, bridge, 8 bars, chorus, 16 bars. And then you never get lost. You could play the song first time through or second time through pretty much accurately because you had it all written down in advance. And I could write in specific drum fills or specific figures. If the producer said, can you copy the guitar part coming out of the chorus, I could write it down and play it first time. So really the reading thing was essential to becoming a busy studio musician, really, which is what I enjoyed the most.
Yeah, absolutely. So once you've escaped after 3 years, escaped might be the wrong word, I don't know. You said you were getting work left, right, and center. Was this mainly studio work at this point, or had you got into the studio stuff
No,
yet?
I hadn't done any studio work. It was all, I was playing in student bands, and we were doing clubs. Like in those days, it was in the early days of DJs. Even it was in the disco era, Saturday Night Fever and all that. And so I used to play in this club in Sheffield 3 or 4 nights a week, and there were no mics on the drums. It was a huge dance hall, and people would come and dance, and then the DJ would do a set of an hour playing Earth, Wind and Fire and the Bee Gees and all that kind of, and Chic, and then we would do a set of an hour, and I'd be playing acoustic drums. So it was a really good grounding, because I was trying to match the records, and with no mics on the drums, and you sounded rubbish, because I mean obviously the production on the Earth, Wind and Fire tracks was amazing. So we were trying to match that, but I didn't do any studio work for years. The first time I did studio work was I moved to London in 1980, and didn't know anyone and had no work. Well, I was playing all these gigs around Sheffield and Leeds and Manchester and places, and I thought the only way I'm really going to get anywhere is if I move to London. And so I moved to London. I was basically living in a squat, sleeping on a floorboards kind of thing, and burning fruit cartons in the fire to keep warm at night and all that kind of stuff. I had absolutely no money, and and then I found a band to play with in pubs again. And then a friend of mine from Sheffield, Jeremy Meek, was playing bass in a band called Live Wire. Jeremy.
Yeah, he's done okay for himself, hasn't he?
Yes.
Yeah, Alan.
Yeah, I love Jeremy.
Paul Carrack. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right, Paul Carrack. But at the time, he was in this band called Live Wire, which were a kind of slightly below standard Dire Straits kind of thing. Yeah. And he said, we're looking for a new drummer for a tour. Can you do it? So I went and auditioned for them, and I did a tour of France and Italy. And at the end of that, unfortunately, the band broke up. But the record company in Italy really loved the band and loved the rhythm section, me and Jeremy, and they invited us back to Italy to play on some albums. So I did 3 or 4. The first studio stuff I ever did was 3 or 4 quite successful pop albums in Italy, which was just amazing for me to be in Rome for a month making records in the studio. It was just absolute heaven. It was great.
That's just, isn't that the perfect story? I mean, it takes some balls, doesn't it, to move to London without many contacts to start with, doesn't it? And then.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've always taken risks, because not to take a risk is very, very boring. And I'm more afraid of what the outcome is. If I don't take a risk, what am I going to end up doing? Working on a building site a year later, depressed. So I'm always happy to take a risk. And so it was a risk. But at the time, I thought, I hang around Leeds and Sheffield, and if I'm lucky, I might hook up with the next Human League or the next ABC or something. But if I'm not lucky, I'm just stuck here. Yeah. And I just thought, if I go to London, there's a lot more competition, but there's also more opportunity. So I decided to move to London. And it's kind of a double-edged sword, because when you move to London, you become known as a freelance player, kind of a mercenary player. Whereas if I had been in the next Heaven 17 or ABC, you get a lot more credibility for being, Larry Mullen Jr. in U2, or, somebody like that, playing forever in a band, and you make more money as well. But actually, as it turned out, I was very happy with that, because I love playing different music with different people all the time. So being a freelance player really just suited me.
Absolutely. I mean, and at that time as well in London, UK wide was like the real heyday for session players, wasn't it, in the 80s, when you think of what was going on musically at the time?
Well, it was kind of difficult, because I've done 4 years at music college, and I was playing fusion, and I kind of missed out on punk and new wave. I left college in 1979, and obviously punk was almost over by then. I really liked I liked Blondie, and I liked Ian Jury and the Blockheads and all that kind of stuff. And I liked the Clash, but I wasn't going out and buying the albums and going to see them live or anything. So when I arrived in London, I was a complete fish out of water, because everybody in London was obsessed with New Wave, the Police, the Clash, and all that kind of stuff. And no one wanted to know a drummer that could play like Lenny White or that kind of music. I'm not saying I could play like Lenny White, but that kind of music anyway. Yeah. And so the first few auditions I went to, people, they heard me play and they say, "Oh, you play great. What have you been doing until now?" And I say, "No, playing jazz rock in clubs in Leeds." And they're going, "Right, next," kind of thing. So you had to kind of play down the academic side of it. And, you know, they were really only interested in people who could barely play, in a way. You know, it wasn't cool to be able to play. It was more cool that, oh, I picked up my drumsticks 2 weeks ago and here I am auditioning. That was more the cool sort of thing. You know, going into, you know, the Buzzcocks and the Smiths and Joy Division and everything. No one wanted an educated musician at that time.
So that punk attitude was still there at that point.
Yeah, definitely.
Interesting stuff. So obviously your first time in a studio, had that kind of made your mind up, this is what I want to do? Did you enjoy it that much? You know, the stuff in Italy you did? I
really enjoyed the stuff in Italy, because, as I said, I could read music and I wrote the charts down and they were all very impressed. "Oh, you played the song the second time through, it sounds great," and everything. Then when I started to accept sessions in London, it was a nightmare. And I don't really know how I got through it, really. It was just a total nightmare, because it was just a completely different ball game. I was lucky enough to get asked to do some good quality sessions with top record producers and everything. And I realized I just didn't know the first thing about drum sounds or how to tune. I'd been to college for 4 years. I'd never had a single lesson in tuning drums. Wow. There was no studio at the college. We didn't have any studio classes, studio craft or anything like that. And so I was just playing by ear and making it up as I went along, which was okay for these Italian records. But as soon as I was in like 1981, 1982 London, I was competing with, you know, American drummers, Jeff Porcaro and Jerry Marotta and people, and Steve Gadd and everything. And I was just so beneath that level. So it was a real baptism of fire. And the first couple of sessions I did, I got there an hour early, set up the drums, got my drum sound, and then the engineer was pulling his hair out saying, "Oh, I can hear a rattle from your second tom, and can you get rid of it?" I had no clue how to get rid of it. And they would say, "Your snare drum's making tom one ring, can you get rid of that?" And I literally had no idea how to even go about doing that. So it was an absolute nightmare. I never worked with any of those producers again. So it was a bloody disaster. So
very anyway, learning on the job, very much so.
Yeah, it was terrible though. You know, it's terrible learning on the job. But anyway, I've told this story 10,000 times, but very briefly, I was still in touch with the people in Italy, and they said, "We're sending one of our artists to London to make an album. Can you play drums on it?" And I said, "Yeah, that'd be great. Another Italian album." And they said, "The only thing is, the artist is a massive fan of Peter Gabriel, and he's asked Jerry Marotta to play some drums on some tracks. Right. And so you'll be playing drums on some songs, and Jerry Marotta." And I was pissed off, and I thought, "Oh, that's a drag. I'm only going to get paid for like 4 songs, and I'll be..." Anyway, the producer phoned me up and said, "Oh, we're in the studio with Jerry tomorrow. Why don't you come down and meet the guys and hang out?" And so I thought, "Oh, okay, I'll go down." And I sat in on this session, and Jerry Marotta set up his drums and started to play. And I just thought, this is incredible. This is exactly where I want to be. He sounds amazing. His playing is amazing. And so I went into the studio where he was, and I was asking him questions. What heads are you using? How are you tuning them? And I noticed he was playing everything rim shots, which I never did. I was still playing like disco center hits, which didn't sound powerful. And I was putting like gaffer tape on the toms to try and cut down on the ring, but his toms were all ringing, but he tuned them so that they all rang in tune with each other, kind of thing. And he did the first song, and he did it like first take. And I thought, oh, I sometimes spend like 3 hours on a song, and he's done it in 10 minutes. And then he did the next song in like the second take, took 10 minutes, from the first time ever hearing it. And I thought, I've just got to completely up my game. And so that actually sorted me out. I went out and he was playing Yamaha recording customs with clear Emperor heads.
Yes,
and
classic sound.
And a big Black Beauty and things like that. And so the next day, I had this old jazz Gretsch kit, which is a very nice kit, but I didn't really know how to tune it or anything. So the next day I sold that and bought a Yamaha recording custom and some Emperor heads, and tuned them the same way I'd watched Jerry Morotta tune them. And I saved up and bought a Ludwig Black Beauty. And I just thought, when I felt more confident, I thought, when I go to the next session, at least I'll have the right gear. And it's just down to me to make it sound right. And I actually started playing rim shots, which was very difficult at first to get them consistent, but I just kept at it for 2 or 3 months, just constantly practicing rim shots until I could get a consistent sound out of it. And yeah, so that was about 1984, and from there on I was just sorted out, and I became known as one of the go-to sort of studio guys in London after that, thanks to Jerry Morotta, really.
Well, I like that story. I've not heard that one, so that's a first for me.
Actually, the funny thing about that I haven't told anyone before, it's a slight tangent, but I lived in Kentish Town at the time, and there was that big drum shop in Kentish Town, Pro Percussion.
Yeah.
And I used to walk past there every day, going to a band rehearsal or whatever. And I walked past one day, I looked in the window, and there was this old Ludwig snare drum in the window, and they wanted £400 for it or something. And it looked really beat up and terrible. And I kept thinking, I thought to myself, I bet that sounds really good, because I think Ludwig drums really sound good. I bet that sounds good, but £400, it's so beat up. I can't believe they're asking £400 for it. So for about 3 months, every time I walked past Pro Percussion, I looked in the window and thought I should go in there and ask them about it one day. I never did. Anyway, just before the session, this Italian album session, I thought I'll go in and buy it. And I went down to Pro Percussion, it had gone. Oh, we sold it yesterday. And when I went to the studio, Jerry Morotta was setting up his drums. He had the flipping drum. And I said, what's that drum? He said, oh yeah, I bought it in Pro Percussion yesterday. It's amazing. And it was one of those NOB nickel over brass 1920s Ludwig. It looked really beat up and ordinary. I'd never seen one before, but it was an amazing drum. He said, oh yeah, it was dirt cheap, 400 quid. And oh no, I should have bought that 2 months ago.
That'd be worth thousands now, wouldn't it? No. Oh, wow. I mean, that's amazing. I mean, you've talked about drum sounds, and everything I've ever heard you play on, the drum sounds have always been incredible. I mean, really,
all right, thanks.
Really good. I mean, I know that it comes from source, obviously, you know, and I know the engineer and producers have a lot to do with it, but it has to be right at source, doesn't it?
Yes, yeah.
The old adage is you can't polish a turd, and that is
that's right.
It's very true, especially with, you know, with drums. And so it's interesting to hear you talk about that, you know. And
because I got myself sorted out on these Italian albums,
yeah,
and the first proper record that I did where I'd sorted out my drum sound was the Whole of the Moon, the Waterboys thing.
Yeah,
that was about 1985.
Yeah.
And so from then I was playing properly, and I could tune a kit and things, and I could get a proper sound. So kind of all the stuff that where I wasn't really happy with my drum sound, not many people have heard.
Well, I mean, for example, that track is a big walloping drum sound, isn't it? Quite a departure from everything that had gone before it with the Waterboys.
Yeah. Well, I know, because I spent 2 weeks in the studio with them at the beginning of the album. Yeah. And again, Mike Scott never really liked me because he thought I was too schooled. Mm-hmm. He was into the punk ethic, and he thought that I was too academic about drums and everything. And Carl, the keyboard player, got me into the band. They were looking for a drummer, and Carl recommended me.
Carl Wallinger, no?
Yeah, Carl Wallinger, yeah. And so I did 2 weeks, and we didn't really get anything done. And Mike was constantly saying, I don't like the drums on this, I don't like the drums on that. So after 2 weeks, I said, goodbye, I'll see you later. And then about 2 or 3 months later, they phoned me up out of the blue. We're working on a song in Liverpool, Amazon Studios, and we think you'd be great on it. Can you come up? So I went up there, actually on the train, because I couldn't drive. I lugged all my drums onto the train, into the baggage compartment on the train. Right. Went up to Amazon, and they played me this track, and it just sounded like Prince. And I just thought, this is right up my street, because I absolutely love Prince and Purple Rain and The Sign of the Times. And apparently while we were on tour in America with the Waterboys, one day off, Carl and Mike had gone to see Purple Rain, and Mike had absolutely loved it. And they'd ended up writing this song, The Whole of the Moon, sort of influenced by Prince. And so it was right up my street. So I just played the straight sort of Prince type drum beat through it. And yeah, it was the only time Mike just let me play what I wanted to play. That's what I always say, you know. On everything else, he wanted to micromanage me and tell me how he wanted me to play. But on that, he just said, go for it. And I went for it. And it turned out to be their biggest hit.
What did he make of that? Was he, because obviously, you know, the one time he lets you do your thing, it blows.
I think he thought it was going to be a B-side or something. Okay. I think that's why he let Carl do more of the production and he let me just play what I wanted, because I think he thought, oh, this sounds so much like Prince, it can't possibly be a Waterboys record, it'll be a B-side or something. And when the record company heard it, of course, they freaked out and said, this is going to be a massive hit. And so they put it out. So he was a bit upset about that. And actually, he famously refused to do Top of the Pops, you know, and so it didn't get as high in the charts the first time around. It got to about number 24 the first time around because he refused to do Top of the Pops, and it dropped out the charts the following week.
Yeah, but it's made up for it since, hasn't it?
Yeah, no, it's an enduring. Actually, the most I know, I didn't go and see the show, but I've seen it on YouTube. But the most exciting thing for me was on that YouTube tour about 8-10 years ago. They sort of opened with it. They had the track coming through the PA when the lights were going down. And there's all these videos on YouTube of them playing these enormous football stadiums in America. The lights go down, the crowd go up, and The Whole of the Moon comes on with my drums. It's absolutely brilliant. Wow. I love that.
I'll bet you did, yeah. What's not to like about that?
No, exactly.
Great walloping. Oh, it's just such a great song anyway.
Yeah.
And then obviously Julian Cope as well. Was that after the Waterboys?
It was really. I did something before. I did an album with Julian that was more kind of arty, weirdo album early on in the Waterboys. And I think he just had a contractual obligation to do one more album. So he did this weird album called Fried, which is a bit of a cult classic, but it didn't sell any. Okay. And the only good thing about that was after the album came out, somebody in Japan said, can you come and do some shows in Japan? And so they called me up, and I rehearsed with Julian for a couple of weeks, and we all went to Japan, which was I'd never been to Japan before. And although he was kind of left field, he had some really fanatical fans in Japan, and we played all these great shows in Japan. So that was a good experience. And then after the Whole of the Moon debacle, not doing Top of the Pops and everything, Carl and I left the Waterboys, and I went back to doing freelance studio work. I did things like Hip Sway and Swing Out Sister, and
okay.
I did an ABC album, and then the Julian Cope people phoned me up and said, oh, you know, we've signed a record deal with Island Records. We're going to do a more commercial album. Will you be in the band? So I did that whole World Shut Your Mouth, St. Julian, and all that stuff. Yeah.
That was a great album. Really.
Yeah, it was good.
And again, big old drum sounds on it that just instantly grabs you, you know? Great song. I'm always, as a drummer, you always listen for the drum sounds. There's nothing worse than hearing something that's, you think, oh, it could be better. But again, really great sounding instruments.
Well, I mean, I think that was one of the best drums. Well, it's one of the best drum sounds I've ever had. And at the time, it was the best drum sound I'd ever had, because they basically hired this guy, Ed Stasium, to do the production for the first part of the album. And he was from America, and he'd done the Ramones, and he'd done Living Colour with Will Calhoun and everything. Yeah. He was a real dyed-in-the-wool rock, old school rock producer. And when he got to the studio, he said, I'm going to hire in all this valve equipment. He hired in all these Pultec mic pre's and EQs and everything. And we spent a couple of hours getting the drum sound. And I came in the control room, and I just thought, this drum sound is absolutely incredible. It's so powerful. He was just a brilliant, well, he's still alive. I'm talking about him in the past tense. He was a great producer, and it was a great sound. And then halfway through the album, we switched over to Warren Livesey, who'd done Deacon Blue, people like that, and there was a more popular sound. But again, he was a great engineer, and we got a great drum sound on that as well. But the track "World Shut Your Mouth" that was done by Ed Stasium, and it was just a massive drum sound.
Huge sounded everything. It sounds huge, and it sounds, it has a live feel to it as well, which
Yes,
it even adds to it even more, you know.
yeah.
And of course, we have to talk Paul McCartney, because at that point, prior to the album that you did, he was going through an interesting phase, wasn't he? In his career, frog chorus things that.
Yes, I did one of those.
Did you really?
Yeah, I could go on to that, but no, I think the thing was he was working with a lot of American session musicians like Jeff Porcaro and all that, Phil Ramone producing and everything.
Yeah.
And I don't know what prompted him to do so, but he hired a new manager, and the manager said, you know, Paul, you're doing a disservice to your legacy of songs. You never play any of the Beatles songs, and also you're playing with all these amazing musicians, but it's just ending up sounding really conservative and safe and everything. What we should do is we should hire a young. Everybody else does this now, but this was kind of the first time anybody had done it. You got to find a young band of people no one's ever heard of, and you know, we'll have this young gun band behind you, and you'll be out there. The older guy, who was only about 40 at the time.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And we'll do an album with them, and then we'll do a tour. And he went, oh, okay, kind of thing. So they set up these kind of audition jam sessions in East London, in a warehouse, East London, in the summer of 1987. And I got phoned as a studio guy around town. I got phoned to go to one of them. And I went down and set up my drums. I didn't really know what to expect. And then Paul and Linda breezed in, and I kind of nearly fainted. and Paul put on a Les Paul guitar. And he just sort of said, I really like playing guitar, so we're just going to do some 50s rock and roll. And luckily, because I'd been to college and I'd played in cover bands and all that kind of stuff, I knew all this Little Richard stuff. I vaguely knew, you know, the idiom of the slightly halfway between a swing and halfway between a straight.
Yeah.
Little Richard, Chuck Berry, all that kind of stuff.
Tricky feel to get right, that, isn't it?
Yeah. And also not hammering the rim shots and not hammering the bass drum. It's all kind of top kit cymbals and washy cymbals and everything. And I think he must have been impressed by that. But anyway, I did a couple of those, and I was the only person that got chosen out of about 100 people. Wow. I was the only person towards the end of the year, they said, we're going to do this album. Will you play drums on it? I said, yeah, I'd absolutely love to. And it was only me and Paul and Linda. And so the manager said, we need to get somebody else. Why don't we get Hamish Stewart from the Average White Band in? So Hamish came down. So it was basically, to begin with, it was me, Paul, Linda, and Hamish Stewart. And the other thing the manager had done, he encouraged Paul to co-write some songs. And he said, you know, your songs are perceived as a bit sort of soppy and mamby-pamby, but you're not really like that. So why don't you write some tougher songs? So they put him together with Elvis Costello, and Elvis Costello did the sort of John Lennon role in the songwriting partnership. So the start of the album was us recording with Elvis Costello these songs that they'd written together.
I'll tell you what, the results are pretty stunning, aren't they? I've always until that point, I'd kind of struggled to take to Paul McCartney's solo material. Even some of the Wings stuff I wasn't a huge fan of. When that album came out, it was like, whoa, this is, you know, long before I knew who'd played on it, I was totally taken with the album straight away. I mean, there's some heavyweight names involved as well, wasn't there?
Well, no, that was the thing, was because it's Paul, you know, we worked with a lot of amazing producers, Trevor Horn and Mitchell Froome from Crowded House and Chris Hughes from Tears for Fears.
Yes.
And Greg Hawkes from The Cars and everything. We worked with all these amazing producers, and Jeff Emerick was involved, the Beatles engineer, and George Martin was involved. And one of the first sessions I did before we started the album, he was working on one of those Rupert the Bear soundtrack things. And again, they called me up and said, Paul would like you to attend the studio tomorrow to play on a song. So I said, fine. I went down there. It turned out to be a song called Tropic Island Hum off a Rupert the Bear movie. Anyway, I sat down, they put a chart in front of me, and it was handy that I could read music. And then all these brass players turned up. It was like a jazz swing track, which is not my forte. And I set up the drums. In walks Jeff Emerick, who I'd never met before, and starts miking up the drums.
Yeah.
And I was going, oh Christ, Jeff Emerick. And then Paul walks in and says, right, we're going to start recording this song. And I've got a co-producer, and in walks Sir George Martin. So one of the first recording sessions I did with Paul was with Jeff Emerick and Sir George Martin. But people have asked me in interviews before, how do you function? Well, you've just got to be professional and think, I'm here for a reason. I know I can play it. I'll just have to play it and not think about it too much, kind of thing.
Yeah, there's plenty of time to think about it afterwards, isn't there?
Yeah.
Get the job done first.
But going back to those audition things, I had the same prejudice. I used to like Wings. I like Band on the Run and Wings Over America and all that stuff. But the last few albums had been a bit wet sounding, and I had the same prejudice. I was doing Julian Cope and the Waterboys, and I thought I was the young hard drummer around town and everything. I went to this first jam session. He plugged in the guitar, turned up the volume, feedback immediately, started screaming, "Lose Hill!" down the microphone. I thought, oh shit, I'm so prejudiced. This guy's actually better than a lot of the people. He was better than most of the Waterboys. He's rocking out. He's such an amazing musician anyway. I used to do gigs with Julian Cope and the Waterboys and people like that. If there were only 5 people in the audience, they get all down about it and do a half energy show. And I thought, that's not good enough. But Paul, just rehearsing in a warehouse, he was, kicking butt kind of thing. And I just thought, here's a real professional, and he's enjoying himself and he's really letting rip. And it was like that when we did the tour. Yeah. It was probably one of the rockingest bands I've ever played in. Everything was like turned to 11, and he was screaming down the microphone. And, he kind of turned it around on that tour. People started to respect him again, but he was an amazing musician who could rock out just like anybody else, but people had painted him as the wet one. John Lennon was the cool one, and Paul was the wet one, which wasn't the case at all.
You must have enjoyed that tour quite a lot, yeah. I imagine. Was the live band made up much the same as the studio musicians? No,
really. Most of the studio was basically Linda, Paul, me, and Hamish most of the time. Okay. And then towards about 3/4 of the way through the album, they got Robbie in to do some guitar overdubs. And then when towards the end of the album, when we were thinking about preparing for the tour, we needed a keyboard player. And I think the manager suggested Wicks, but I'd already done sessions with Wicks, and Robbie knew Wicks really well. And when the name of Wicks came up, me and Robbie said, oh yeah, get Wicks in. He's amazing. He's the perfect guy for the band. And so when we were doing the first rehearsals, it was just it's the best band I've ever been in. I mean, it was just amazing. I mean, Hamish could play bass, guitar, was an amazing singer. And Wicks was an amazing keyboard player. Robbie's probably one of the best guitarists I've ever played with. And Paul was playing amazing bass and guitar and piano. And Linda was just great fun to be around. Linda was, she wasn't really interested in being a great musician, but she was just a nice person to have around. And so it was one of those things, like all bands say, it's us against the world kind of thing. It felt like a really tight-knit team when we went out on tour. It was a really good feeling to be playing. And it was quite small. When I did Dire Straits, there was 9 people on stage, and it felt more like a sort of chamber orchestra, whereas the McCartney tour felt like it was an actual rock band.
Of course. That's interesting. So that felt more like a rock band than Dire Straits.
Yeah, definitely.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah. See, Paul, I can't remember him telling me what to play on anything. When we started rehearsing, because he's got his own complex, he's got his own recording studio, his own rehearsal space. We just started sort of informal rehearsals, just playing songs. And he gave us some cassettes and said, shall we learn these songs for next week and everything? And a lot of the songs he'd never played, because after sort of 1966 or whatever it was, the Beatles never played live. So a lot of the stuff from Sergeant Pepper's and obviously Abbey Road and Magical Mystery Tour, they never played live. So kind of Robbie and Wicks were teaching him the songs in a way. How did the bass part go? I've only ever played it once on the record kind of thing. So I can't remember Paul ever telling me what to play or anything, but I just wanted to do the right thing by Ringo. I just thought Ringo was an amazing drummer, and also I really liked Paul's drumming on Band on the Run. He kind of played for the song and he did weird fills in weird places, and I really wanted to recreate that live. And so I just chose to play as much like Ringo on the Beatles stuff and as much like Paul on the Wings stuff as I could. And he never questioned it. And so when we went out on tour, it was just fun. You know, he was just laughing and really enjoying it. And to cut to the chase, when we did the Dire Straits thing, it was more scripted. It was Mark saying, oh no, you have to hit that cymbal then, and that tom has to come when I play that riff on the guitar, you have to hit that tom. And so it was like a mini orchestral, which was good in a different way. It was amazing discipline to have to play almost an orchestral score every night perfectly for 2.5 hours. But it wasn't really like a rock show. There wasn't much improvisation. It was a lot of it was like worked out, quite complex music worked out in advance.
I know that Mark Knopfler's a bit of a tough taskmaster with people. I was lucky enough to have interviewed Pick Withers. Oh gosh, way back at the beginning, and obviously from the very early days, you know, till 83 or whatever it was. And he said much the same, you know, that there's he's a tough taskmaster.
No.
But was it, am I right in thinking it was a gig you weren't that interested in initially? I think
well, I've said that.
Yeah.
I mean, not for super negative reasons. Basically, I should have kept doing McCartney, really. I decided at the end of the McCartney tour, you can't get any better than this kind of thing. And he was talking about doing another studio album and then eventually another tour. And the studio album, the Flowers in the Dirt album, was about 14 months of studio.
Wow.
Playing the same sort of 20 songs, which got whittled down to about 12 songs.
Yeah.
It was really good fun. And we had a laugh every day. And I just thought, I don't know if I could do all that again. It wouldn't be the same. We were like discovering each other and discovering the process. Me and Hamish were discovering Paul and Linda when we did the Flowers in the Dirt album. And I just thought, you can't kind of go and do that again. And then the tour was so incredible. I mean, it was just so exciting when the tour got announced and the whole first American leg sold out in 20 minutes.
Wow.
Kind of thing. And we ended up playing these huge, enormous football stadiums. And I just thought, would it be the same if I did it again in a year's time or in 2 years' time? And I thought, no, I'd rather sort of leave on a high kind of thing, which was probably a stupid thing to do. Anyway, I told Paul after the tour that I didn't want to do it anymore, which was obviously a very difficult conversation because no one tells Paul they don't want to work with him. So he was annoyed and I was embarrassed, and I'm probably thinking what an idiot I am. But I just knew in my stomach, I just knew I couldn't do it. And so I was going to go back to doing freelance studio work, which was what my first love was. And I'd had a few successes. The Edie Brickell album had come out and been a big success in America. And so I thought, oh, no, I could be the British Jeff Porcaro or something like stupid like that. So that was my plan. And about 6 months later, I started getting phone calls from Dire Straits management. We finished the album and we want to do a tour. And we saw you with Paul McCartney and we'd love you to do the tour. I just thought, I don't really want to go on another massive long tour. And so I said, no, I'm going to stay at home and do studio work. So I went, okay. And then a few weeks later, they phoned again. No, we really want you to do the tour. Anyway, this went on and on a bit. And I had a manager at the time. And my manager said, look, I know you don't really want to do it, but why don't you just go and meet them? And then if you meet them, they'll either not want you to do the tour because they don't think you're any good and you won't have to worry about it, or else you'll like them and you'll want to do the tour. So why don't you just go and meet them? So I went to our studios where they were mixing the On Every Street album, and they had me play drums on most of the songs. That was kind of an audition. And the album, Jeff Porcaro had played on the album, and I just thought, well, again, the drum sound was phenomenal. The drumming was amazing. And so I was seduced, really, because I was playing these songs that Jeff Porcaro had played on. They played me the version with Jeff on it, and they said, you go out there and do something similar. So when I was playing along to the songs, I kind of imagined myself at Wembley Stadium playing this song like Jeff Porcaro, and thought this could be really good fun. So I kind of got seduced, and at the end of that, they said, oh, we'd still like you to do the tour. And I said, okay, I'll do the tour, really, because I wanted to recreate those Jeff Porcaro songs live.
What an album. I mean, Calling Elvis, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, that must be it's a song I've never played, but I can imagine it must be a lot of fun to play.
It was great because it was actually one of the easier songs in the show. It just was it was just two grooves, really, isn't it? It's just the tom groove and then the open hi-hat verse groove. So I didn't have any complex arrangement. In the show, it went on for about 15 minutes. But it was a good warm-up because it just started with this tom groove, which is easy. And then most of the song was the open hi-hat thing. And then there was a big, long Danny Cummins percussion solo, which I was going, thank goodness he's doing all the work and I'm just backing him up. So that was good. And it just went down phenomenally, especially the percussion solo. At the end of that, the whole crowd went completely ballistic. It was a great way to start the show.
Amazing, isn't he? An amazing.
It was amazing. It was really good. It was really good value every night. I really enjoyed that. Yeah. And then some of the other songs I didn't enjoy because they were so complicated. And if you know, I came from like an improvisational kind of drumming thing where I tried different things out every night, or I tried a different fill, or I try a different ride cymbal or something. If you did that on some of the songs with Dire Straits, Mark would just turn around and give you a dirty look, you know.
Yeah, that's
if you played the crash cymbal slightly too loud just after his little guitar figure, he'd immediately turn around and go like that. And I just thought, you know, it's a rock band. It's not Leonard Bernstein at the Carnegie Hall kind of thing. So some of the songs I didn't enjoy playing because they were just so complex. You started the song and you'd think you'd be in a physical state of nerves. Think, can I get to the end of the song without getting a dirty look, kind of thing.
So
yeah. So
in some respects, he didn't want you to be Chris Whitten. He, you know.
Well, that's right.
You know, he didn't want you to express yourself in any shape or form.
Well, he didn't want me to be he kind of didn't want me to be the drummer because he asked Jeff Porcaro to do the tour. Right. And Jeff was doing Toto, and Jeff wasn't interested in doing a year and a half on the road with Dire Straits when he had amazing albums to play on and he had his own band Toto. And so I was kind of second or third choice anyway. But you're right. Once they'd chosen me to be the drummer, they should have taken me for me and let me. I mean, there's the basic of management in any business, whether you're making cars or producing television programs. When you hire somebody, you encourage them to be their best. You don't sort of criticize them and try and change them. That's not the point. You hire them for what they do, and then you try and get the best out of them. So yeah, it was a tough tour. Kind of the other tough aspect was it was hundreds of shows, and it was like over a year. It was like nearly a year and a half with the rehearsals and everything. So by the end of it, everybody was pretty much fried.
Yeah, tough. But some great songs, great back catalogue of songs, and you know, there's some Manu Katché stuff in there as well. Yeah. You know, so you've had some nice drummers to draw from, haven't you, for parts and things. So
the weird thing for me was we did that song Heavy Fuel, which was kind of Mark's revision of Money for Nothing. Yeah. And I just thought, oh, Jeff Porcaro, and I used to play it every night. It wasn't until after the tour that somebody told me, oh, Manu Katché played on that. And it's just not his thing at all.
No. It's not as organic, if you like, as Manu Katché might have done it. But, you know, well, he did do it, but I totally get it.
Well, when you look at Planet of New Orleans, that's quintessential Manu Katché. It's got like a loping tom groove and it's kind of jazzy, but Heavy Fuel's more like Jeff Porcaro, but it's amazing. Well, it shows that he can do all things.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what these guys are, you know, up there. Well, Jeff,
Yeah.
obviously. And so, what are you up to at the moment, Chris? Have you've got lots of recording stuff going on?
Oh, yeah, I've got a home studio, and I do remote recording, and I've been planning to do it for like 10 or 15 years, but I just happened to have never lived anywhere that had a good enough internet to be able to send anyone any files. So finally living somewhere, it's semi-slow internet, but they're going to give us the high-speed cable broadband in a couple of months' time. So even then I could send people files. And so I engineer and record myself. I've got all the mics, I've got all the drums, I've got loads of amazing drums, vintage Camco, and all the Noble. I've got the Noble and Cooley stuff from Dire Straits and Paul McCartney. And so yeah, I've got a website, chriswhitten.com. So yeah, people can ask me to play on their songs. And I've done a lot of drum sampling since the Dire Straits thing. I got involved in drum sampling with Tune Track. And I've done a lot of packs with Tune Track. And we've done our own pack with record producer Peter Henderson, who I met doing Paul McCartney. We've got our own drum sample company, and we've done stuff for Roland. We did the TM6 Pro, which is like a hybrid drum sampler thing. We did the chord library for that.
That's quite
sorry.
That's a fairly
it's a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. Well, they brought it out. It's meant for live drummers to back up their sounds, to make, how it's the trend in really mainstream live music to have like samples on the bass drum and the snare and everything. And so it's designed for that. They brought it out about a year before COVID-19 hit. So hardly anyone's used it yet. Only people now are starting to use it because no one was touring. It's not for the studio, it's for live. And so you've got 6 triggers. You can either have like a bass drum. It's a great piece of kit because you can put your own samples on it. You can put 808 samples on it and have your bass drum. So you've got your acoustic bass drum through the PA, and you can have an 808 sample through the PA mixed in, and you can attach pads to it. So you can have backing vocals or brass figures or percussion going. It's a great bit of kit. So we did the core library. We recorded the library for that at Real World Studios and Rockfield. And then we did our own expansion pack, which is available on our own website. We're called CP Samples. And we've done expansion packs for the TD50 and the TD17 as well, but based on drum samples, basically.
Yeah, of course. Wow. So see, the sampling stuff, is that something you enjoy? Do you get from that or not?
Well,
just hitting the same.
The Tune Track, no. The Tune Track stuff, no, because their products are so deep. There's so many samples. The first one we did was fun, and then they developed their sample engine, and it all got really, really complex. I know I was talking to Matt Hector, the drummer. He does. Well, he was doing Iggy Pop. Mark Armand, I was thinking, he does things like that. He recently did a sample pack. He was there for 2 weeks, sampling every day for 2 weeks.
Right.
He said he really enjoyed it. I mean, the great thing about it is all about drums, and it's about drum sounds. It's very creative because you're just trying to get different drum sounds the whole time, which I really enjoyed that aspect. I found cymbals and everything are a nightmare because you hit a cymbal, you've got to wait a minute for it to stop ringing before you can hit it again. And you have to be so precise. What tends to happen is you hit a cymbal and then you're desperate to sneeze or cough, and you think, if I do that, it's going to ruin it. And it's very stressful. But anyway, doing the stuff for Roland, they've got fewer sample layers, so actually it's just pure fun because you only have to do like 10 hits on a snare drum or 10 hits on a bass drum. It's so easy. But the Tune Track stuff is really quite complicated and quite intense.
So if you suffer from hay fever, then maybe that's not the career for you.
No, you can't do it. You have to do it in winter.
Yeah. Oh, look, Chris, this has been an absolute treat. It really has. Thank you so much for giving up your time. I know you're busy, so it's all right. I really appreciate it. It's been fantastic.
It's been great talking.
It has indeed. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Hope you have too. So thank you very much indeed. And
all right.
Hopefully we'll see you out and about doing your thing shortly.
Super. All right. Cheers.
Okay, mate.
Thanks. Bye.